Sam.
Dougie.
Dortmund for centre-backs, Girona for wingers, Aston Villa for strikers. Which club signed the best players in every position? Today, we find out.
Why am I here? Well, the answer to that is data. Lots and lots of data.
Here's what scouts are looking for in a winger.
For a central midfield player who can run, how do they take and deal with the football? How do they move? What's their spirit like?
In a striker, you want someone that can put the ball in the back of the net. You want a finisher, first and foremost. Scoring goals is one of the hardest things to do in football.
First thing I'm looking for is the attitude and adaptability to the session. Then obviously you're looking at technicality, movement off the ball, hunger. I'm looking at the desire.
They're going to be looking for bravery on and off the ball.
Hello and welcome back to The Truth, everybody. It is episode 19. We are back into the flow of things after our little mid-season pauser. Joining me, as ever, it's the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Sam Tighe. How are we, sir? Looking resplendent for those that can see in New Balance gear.
Still sponsored.
Still sponsored.
Still putting on the tribal colours. Very well, thank you, and feeling very relaxed because you're hosting. I mean, if people hadn't figured that out by now. Start again. Start the whole podcast again. Speaking of starting again, the intro, what was that? Dortmund centre-backs, Villa strikers? What?
Dortmund for centre-backs. I was saying which club could you get the best players for in every position?
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to shop, I'm effectively seeing this episode as more like a shopping list.
Okay.
So if you want to get, a winger, where do you go? Where do you look? Who signs the best wingers? Etc. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see where the discussion goes. Let's bring in, before we get going, Mr. Jack Collins. I'm not going to do one of your horrid intros.
What?
Because I need to be nice to Jack. His side are coming to my side on Sunday at 2 p.m. Jack, I saw you doing a little Sunderland podcast. Not a little Sunderland podcast, but you're doing a podcast with a Sunderland podcast group. What were your thoughts? What were their thoughts? Were there nerves in the camp?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of us were like, yeah, we'll take a point, which is nice. We're in slightly different scenarios, but we're pretty similar position in the table, pretty similar points. And it's just a question of, I think, if someone loses this, it's the end of the European dream. Whereas a point probably keeps us both sort of vaguely alive in that conversation. So we both sort of shook hands on a point. So I'm assuming that's how it's going to play out now. But best laid plans and all that. Dude.
Well, exactly. I'd happily take that. I'm coming back from a stag do on Sunday. So anything to soothe my no doubt pounding head after a couple of beers at the weekend would do me wonders as we take a diverted train back from Durham to London, but I'm looking forward to it. But anyway, back to the main topic at hand. I am hosting, as Sam pointed out, because Sam wrote the kind of bedrock of this article, this topic. And judging by your first question to me, you think I've maybe interpreted it in a slightly different way to what you have. But what were your thoughts behind your article? What went down in the ESPN headspace, etc.?
So I think I teased it last week actually on the pod that I was writing a feature for ESPN, basically trying to figure out which clubs recruit best in specific positions. Because obviously there's plenty of clubs that get recruitment right, plenty of clubs that get recruitment wrong. Fine, those are two different categories. And then there's a whole separate category, which is which teams produce from their academies in particular positions. That's another one again. But really what I wanted to look at was, because there are some clear examples of this, which teams are just really good at finding centre mids, and which teams are just like bang on when it comes to recruiting fullbacks. And then when you figure out that list, why? Ask the question why. Figure out what they do that is so good and what makes them so good at it. So that's where the reported element comes in. So I spent like a week sending passive-aggressive voice notes to everyone that I know in the scouting world to say, do you know anything about this? Do you know anyone attached to these processes? Have you ever spoken to anyone? Have you been involved in any of these? And that's the nature of reporting, right? You ask questions and you speak to your contacts, and you eventually get to the nub of it. So what I tried to do for every example that I put in the article was try to explain a little bit as to why these teams are so good. So it took me slightly further away from dudes sitting around naming old footballers than I wanted. But I'm sure we can get back to that at some point.
I always enjoy
and
that.
More into a reported feature, but that's the nature of the work. So basically what I've produced is a little list. It's not exhaustive, but it is a pretty good list of like those who excel at scouting and recruiting in very specific positions. And I've got at least one for every position except goalkeeper.
Okay. Well, I actually had a thought about goalkeeper, but I did agree with what you wrote in the article that goalkeeper is far more random than other positions. kind of shooting into the wind. I often find that when trying to assess centre-backs as well, unless you're watching centre-backs, which these scouts no doubt are, on a weekly basis for 90 minutes, then it's really difficult to assess the strength of centre-backs because football highlights are often based around goal-mouth action, which doesn't show centre-backs in a very good light often. So you just highlight their mistakes rather than all the quiet things that they do so well.
And from a data perspective, centre-backs are notoriously difficult because they are so dependent on team style. Probably more dependent on team style than any other position. So some of their statistics may flourish and some may look really poor, but very often it's the case that is a reflection of a team style. And I remember one scout telling me a couple of years ago when I was looking at Ronnie Edwards' spider graph for his attributes, and obviously his pass volume, his pass attempts, his passes completed, his passes into the final third, they're off the charts, right? Because Peterborough were a very possession-based team. He just signed for Southampton at the time, and I was like, oh, so he's a good passer. And he was like, well, yes, but be careful, because when it comes to centre-backs, like most of Ronnie Edwards' brilliant stats there are driven by the fact that that's what he's been asked to do. You might have a fantastic passer being hidden in Sean Dyche's back line, and you never know. So it is a dodgy place. But goalkeepers, I was specifically warned off by a couple of contacts because they just suggested that it really was just incredibly random. And of course, the nature of goalkeepers as well is that when people tend to find a good one, they don't really want to move them on so quickly. Whereas I think with a lot of other positions, there's a lot of flipping that happens. So if certain clubs will flip fullbacks very quickly, centre backs very quickly, strikers and wingers really, really quickly, as we'll come on to. But a goalkeeper, if you find a good one, you tend to want to hang on to him for about a decade. So the turnover is much less great. And that means that it's much harder to identify teams that have good processes, because over the course of maybe 30 years, a team might have 5 goalkeepers. And of course, you'd have so many different sporting directors and scouts attached to the process that it might not be a process. It might just be a case of, well, you just bought 3 really good goalies. The closest I could get, for what it's worth, and you may have a suggestion too, I don't know, was Rennes.
Oh, that's good.
And Rennes will feature later anyway for a different position. But Rennes have managed to go through a nice little set of goalkeepers that actually started all the way back with Petr Cech and includes Edouard Mendy.
Cool.
So they've got some pretty decent history there, but I decided after some advice to just leave them out completely.
Fair enough. I also think goalkeeper's probably the only position where there is 2 markets almost. There's backup goalies that go around like this, and there's sort of first choice goalies, which the positions that they're being recruited for, as you say, are much more infrequently or less frequently available, let's say. So that, I think of Stefan Ortega going to somewhere like Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest, they are constantly recruiting backup goalkeepers, and there's just this separate market that almost goes for it. I actually thought in the Premier League, Man City were one of the best examples, but then I think that's partly due to the fact that Joe Hart proved to be an excellent addition way back when he signed from, what was it, Shrewsbury, I believe it was. Yep. Edison also was perfect for Pep's style of play, at least in those early years before slightly fading. And then they did sign 2 quality goalkeepers last summer, and now one of them is very much rotting on the bench and came out at the weekend and said that he wasn't happy his position or his role in the squad in James Trafford.
Well, don't worry, James, you'll be at Villa by June. Probably.
I like that.
Emi Martinez is going to go, and Villa are going to need to sign a goalkeeper, and I imagine they're just going to be pointing straight at that guy. But if somebody wants to make the move for James Trafford, they will, because we know he's very good.
And I think I'm also slightly giving them too much credit, because there was that season or so where the Claudio Bravo year as well, and the Joe Hart phasing out, that was a little bit ugly for a couple of years at Man City as well. Yeah. And prior to Joe Hart, there was the likes of David James. And
don't have to go that far back.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Don't worry too much.
In some of these, I went really far back.
If you start slagging off Nicky Weaver, we're going to have problems.
No one knows who that is.
All my City mates, I think in an effort to prove that they're not glory hunters, do just constantly talk about the likes of Nicky Weaver, etc. Yeah. Okay, but let's start at the back and go forwards, and maybe start at fullback in specifically, Sam. Which club took your eye for signing particularly good left backs or right backs?
Yeah, probably the last one to make it into the list, just after my editor pushed me to include someone for fullbacks. Had a little scout around, and Bayer Leverkusen were very, very interesting. They've had some serious hits. They've got a very modern scouting department. They've got Simon Rolfers, who used to play for them, has been sporting director for like 5 or 6 years. heads up a very obviously smart department. They've got a specific South American scouting arm that they're very, very proud of. And they have picked up some very, very good players from South America. So if you think of general scouting patterns and paths well trodden, you think of league to league. So you think of maybe a lot of players coming from Portugal to England, but you also think of like Bayer Leverkusen and South American players. There have been like so many of them. So they have pretty much excelled, I would say, in the fullback market. Jeremy Frimpong, obviously not from South America, but picked up from Celtic. Pierre Nkapie, centre-back, left centre-back, whatever you might want to call it, signed from Talleres in Argentina. Arthur, who's currently playing opposite Grimaldo. I mean, this is all in the last 5 years. It's a pretty strong hit rate. So I think it's fair to say they've got their eye on the ball here.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, particularly in terms of right backs, I thought Inter Milan have had a very good recent record. But then I suppose they did also have the advantage of the Conte years where they did overspend quite dramatically for their income as well and picked up Achraf Hakimi. But going from Achraf Hakimi, who they signed for 43 million euros in 2020, and then a year later when Hakimi went to PSG, picking up Denzel Dumfries has proven to be a really good addition there. They also had Maicon as a right back. They had Javier Zanetti arrive in the mid-90s as well. On the other side, they gave Roberto Carlos his first opportunity in Europe as well when they signed him from Palmeiras. So I thought, in terms of fullbacks, Inter Milan were probably the best that I could come up with there. Did you have any other suggestions for fullbacks, or should we move into centre-backs?
No, let's move to centre-backs. So I've got a couple of really strong ones. And what you'll see is, so the examples that I've pulled up are generally bridging the last sort of 5 years or so. And the ones that we can kind of complement there, like you have with Inter, probably span a bit further back. There were some striker situations that we'll get to later that I really wanted to add in, but I simply couldn't add any information to it, any insight to it, so I left it aside, but they're well worth touching on later. But yeah, modern times, Bournemouth have very clearly got a group of scouts who can identify centre-backs. Their sort of very recent run of Marcos Senesi, Ilya Zabani and Dean Hyson is, I mean, you'd be proud to have that over a 15-year period, let alone a 3-year period, maybe even a 2-year period. It's phenomenal. We talked about Marcos Senesi on the Ranks podcast last week and how he's very underrated, probably because he's had a couple of run-ins with VAR, which do colour your perceptions, but also he's never the most shiny thing happening at Bournemouth, but he's always there and he's very, very good. Zabani, Hyson, I think the transfers they made last summer basically speak for themselves. So Bournemouth know exactly how to scout centre-backs. They don't find it tricky, quite clearly. They're part of probably one of the best multi-club organisations going, with Lorient and Moreirense in Portugal. Sorry, Jack, I butchered that. Moreirense. Is that right? Moreirense? Moreirense. Yeah, that one will do. So they share knowledge. They're very, very good at recruiting for different leagues. They're very good at identifying which players can move from one league to another. And one of their scouts basically has suggested a minimum height of 185 centimetres.
Really?
So if you're below that, you probably aren't going to make it in the Premier League as a centre-back, which that's about 6'2". So that's quite reasonable if you think about it. But obviously some outliers exist. Some serious outliers exist, like Lisandro Martinez. You are going to need to be really, really, really good at other stuff in order to make up for that. But for a club like Bournemouth, who, let's put yourself in their shoes for a second. You want to buy good players, fine. You want to buy players that can grow. You want to buy players that can play for you, but you also want to sell them, basically. That's the nature of the business model for Bournemouth. How easy is it to sell a very specific and, let's say, small centre-back? The clientele that they're going to be attracting is going to be more limited than if they're just all of those things and 6'2". So I think they're future-proofing their sales a little bit there by just identifying, yes, the nature of the league, but also if they are tall, more teams are going to want them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of a club that's clearly looking to that physical model, particularly with the way that they play, and despite the constant churn of players that they have at this club, they always play in as a very similar style, and a churn of managers as well, is RB Leipzig. And their run of centre-back signings is quite phenomenal. So Klosterman, €1 million in 2014. The following year, Halstenberg, Willy Orban, for a combined 5.5. In 2016, they signed Upamecano. Then you jump a few years to Gvardiol and Simican arriving in 2021. Then Lukeba for 30 million euros in 2023. The most expensive of those was Gvardiol for 37 million euros. Sold him for a massive upturn in price as well. And there's a nice range of attributes in these players as well. You know, obviously gone into the much more modern style centre-back, although Hustenberg and Willy Orban and Klosterman were amazing servants and very tactically versatile as well, but really suit that vertical style of play. They can cover ground really effectively. Like, none of them are sluggish. And for a club that are completely like Bournemouth, but even to a greater extent, or for longer, I should say, being built across their sails, they're clearly recruiting very, very well in that department for sure.
For sure. And also in the Bundesliga, Wolfsburg.
Yes.
Wolfsburg are a bit of a modern marker for centre-backs, and they seem to be very, very good. I think, clearly what they're doing is they're analysing physical data and they're looking for outliers, which is what a lot of these clubs do, right? Like, they've all got the same services and they've all got the same tools. They all use Wisecout, they all use Skill Corner, and any outliers immediately just ping up. And they look for really, really, really fast centre-backs.
For anyone that hasn't been on those data providers or services, what's on Wisecout?
I mean, Wisecout is a video archive and it's just footage of every player playing every game.
If you can ever get access to it, Sam showed it to me on his laptop. I've never actually used it, but you can type in Kusanov long passes, and you get 15 examples. Is that right?
Well, you get every long pass he's ever made. Yeah, yeah, it's more than 15, mate. And it will go back to the Uzbekistan under-21s if you pay enough for it, which I don't. But that is the level of the library if you wish to see it. And then Skill Corner is a lot of physical data. It's a lot of running data. It tracks like off the ball runs, channel runs for strikers. It's got all sorts, and they've all got access to all of this, and they're all looking at it. And anyone that pops up on the margins, immediately everybody knows who they are. I'll mention a player later when it comes to strikers who I was told everybody knew exactly who that was just because he was so fast. But Maxence Lacroix and Mickey van der Ven were signed by Wolfsburg for a combined 6 million euros from second division clubs in France and the Netherlands, respectively, and then sold on for massive profits. And they have Kouliarakis right now, the best young Greek centre-back, who is stepping into that breach, and in the next couple of years we'll just go for a similar price. In January they spent quite a lot of time chasing Charlie Cresswell, formerly of Leeds United, academy product, which suggests to me that he has developed very nicely at Toulouse, and he's really good, because I trust Wolfsburg when it comes to centre-backs.
Yeah, it's a very good shout as well. I mean, I'm going to take on board the fact that we're trying to keep this modern, but in terms of a club that historically have signed very good centre-backs, that should come as no surprise. But Juventus have had an amazing record in the transfer market in terms of centre-backs. Less so recently, but then I think they've had less money to spend. And of course, signings like De Ligt, I don't think... De Ligt's overhated in terms of his Juventus stint. I don't think it's as bad as people make out. But Bremer's was a very good addition. Danilo actually proved to be a useful pickup and very versatile
amazing.
as well.
If it hasn't went for torn ACL, he'd be...
Yeah, when he's fit, absolutely phenomenal. But you go back to Bonucci and Cannavaro and Chiellini.
Andrea Barzagli for like 300k or something.
Sure.
It's like the best deal of all time.
I mean, Lilian Thuram, also, they invested so much money in him at the time, but amazing addition. So Juventus and centre-backs, no surprise. Right, let's move into midfield. I kind of split my central midfield into defensive midfielders, central midfielders, and attacking midfielders, which I had a few theories about. Fine. But what did you kind of think about in terms of midfielders and clubs?
Well, I just put one in for central midfielders in terms of what I could report on. It was Brighton.
Yeah.
Brighton's run is spectacular, and it appears that there's a very specific reason for this, which is that they have position scouts. So not too many clubs from the Premier League do this, as far as I know, but they have a person who is quite literally in charge of scouting midfielders. And I suspect it might be more like box-to-box midfielders than just midfielders, because that's the type they tend to go for. I know Man City also do this, but not too many have someone who is just in charge of looking at specific players in a position. Like, just a person is in charge of that entire department. Like, imagine if that was your job. I scout centre mids for Brighton. It's quite odd, but whoever this person is, and I don't know who it is, fair play.
They've done well.
Like, fair play. So Moises Caicedo plucked from
He's an
Ecuador.
all right player.
Plucked from Ecuador for £4 million. Obviously sold on for a British record at the time, 115 million. Signed
After about 40 games as well.
Yeah, not that many. So fine, if you know it, you know it. It's fine. Carlos Baleba was then brought in. He'd only played like 600, 800 minutes of football in Liga at that point, and they dropped 30 million on him because they know, like they can just tell. And then they've got Yassin Ayari, who's been a really nice pickup and has just settled into life really, really nicely. And they have Malik Yalkouye in the ranks already there. He's on loan at Swansea, I think, at the moment, but he was on loan elsewhere before. He is popping off on the athletic metrics, and they all are. So, like Baleba, Caicedo, and Yalkouye all hit like 95th percentiles for like high-speed sprints, high-speed distance run in all of these platforms that clubs use. So they're the outliers. So Yalkouye will just pop up, and someone will see that he's hit 90th percentile or more in like 7 different sprint metrics, and they'll go, "Ha, who's that guy?
Yeah,
let's have a look." And of course, he'll be at a small club, and they'll go 6 million. Cool, take the punt. You take the punt on someone who is that athletic because you can be pretty sure that they can cope in the Premier League, and it just comes down to adaptability and coaching to make them a really good player. And they took the plunge on Baleba after like just not long at all. They trust their instincts and they look at physical data, and the combination of those two things has put them on this incredible run.
Yeah, it's very, very impressive. That is quite remarkable when you think about it. I mean, in preparation to this, I also put a tweet out to get fans' perspectives on what their club signs best. And a guy called CFC Ben _ Chelsea fan, of course, suggested that Chelsea signed very good defensive midfielders. And actually, he sent the list over, and it is pretty impressive. What I would say about Chelsea is they're always a pretty big fish in the transfer market. So it's not uncovering a gem in the same way that Brighton are. But some of the names they've had in that sort of defensive midfielder position, Caicedo, Jorginho, Essien, Kante, Matic, John Obi Mikel, Claude Makelele, of course. That's a quite impressive history. And it's kind of formed the basis of their more attacking midfielders and attacking wingers that they've had over the years, the Lampards and Hazards, etc., and for Fabregas's, etc., to kind of wreak havoc or across defences.
Yeah, who's missed out there? Ramirez,
yeah, very good box to box.
I know he ended up playing a few other bits, but he was a fantastic box midfielder.
Yeah.
So probably an important note there, which is that none of the clubs I've read out so far, I think, are typical big fish.
Yes,
and so yes, this conversation takes on a different tone when you start to look at. Real Madrid do sign well. They signed some cracking attacking players, but they're also capable of spending £100 million on players. So it is a slightly different conversation. Not to take anything away from Chelsea, spending big money is not necessarily easy. It's something we talk about quite a lot, and Jack, you and I have talked about for years on Ranks. Just because you can spend 60 million on a player doesn't mean you're going to get it right.
Absolutely,
and you still have to be good at spending £60 million. Even just because you've got it doesn't mean you're going to be automatically successful. So Chelsea have spent big money but spent it well. But for the most part, the clubs on my list are the at least one tier down, maybe 2 or 3, and they have to box a bit clever.
I like it. I think another key sort of trait across a lot of these clubs that we're going to mention is the kind of traits or position that their manager played in as well, a lot, or the kind of style of play that the manager favours as well. Arsene Wenger, during his time at Arsenal, particularly in the final 15 years.
The final 15 years.
I know, but really went towards from the 2005 to, it's more like 12, 2005 to 2017 or whenever he left, really kind of lost track it went much more artistic and much more less physically dominant midfielders. Like the run of Hleb, Rosicky, Nasri, Ramsey, Cazorla, Ozil, they're all the same type of player, aren't they? And you didn't get the Ray Parlers and Patrick Vieiras and Petites, etc. And I think Man City with Pep Guardiola, I think he always signs very competent central midfielders because that was the position he played. And I think there is something to be said of managers knowing their positions incredibly well, which I've got another example for later. Another example for number 10s, which does fit into the more sort of tier below the clubs I've just mentioned, Atalanta and number 10s. That is a classic. Gasperini he knew what he was doing in that number 10 market, whether it was De Ketelaere or Samardzic, who arrived last summer, of course, as well, so it wasn't quite Gasperini, but Pasalic, Koopmeiners as well, scored some fantastic goals against Galatasaray earlier this week in that kind of drubbing in the end. Juventus completely disintegrating after going down to 10 men. But Koopmeiners, very good footballer. Hasn't really shown it so much at Juventus, but I do think he's a very good footballer. Malinovsky, do you remember how hard he hits the ball? I mean, he's still playing, but absolutely...
Scored the other week.
Yeah, absolute traction engine of a boot. And then the more sort of artistic Ilicic, Papu Gomez, etc. Atalanta and number 10s, that was the place to go.
Yeah, nice. Really nice. Probably helps that they often play two.
Yeah, true.
Which is a topic we'll come on to with the 9s as well. But I think when you share a position like that, it is actually quite a lot easier to shine, even though you're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, like the amount of shots and creative opportunities that you get should technically halve because there's two of you. But I think it loosens the load on you.
Also, they're kind of number 10s in lots of cases and wingers. That you're kind of looking. None of those are like rapid speedsters. They're more sort of number 10s
for sure. I've got some wingers as well.
Nice.
I mean, there's loads of clubs that sign obviously really good wingers, but I've got a couple for you. It's Rennes, so return of the Rennes. They didn't make it in for goalkeepers on a technicality, but they're back in for the wingers. Again, the last 5 years or so, it's been some run. So they signed Ismail Assar. They were the first ones to really take up Ismail Assar. He just had a brilliant season at Metz. And Rennes were willing to put down, I think it was 17 million euros at the time after one season. 5 or 6 years ago, one season at Metz, they'd seen enough. They took Ismail Assar, then sold him on for a profit. Pretty much replaced him with Rafinha, who had done a couple of seasons in Portugal with Vitória Guimarães, and they took him on, and then 1 season later sold him on to Leeds. Jeremy Doku came in next. He was from Anderlecht. They sold him on after a couple of years for quite a massive fee, really, to Manchester City, about 50 million in total. And Martin Terrier has been through that system as well, who's just been a bit unlucky with injuries, really. They've got an eye for a winger, for sure. And also, there's something in the water at Rennes with wingers anyway, because Desiree Doué and Ousmane Dembele came through the academy there in the last sort of like 7 years. So in total, the fans at Rennes, any season ticket holder for the last 7 years, has watched Dembele, Doué, Sarr, Rafinha, and Doku.
Wow, that's true.
Good Lord.
They're not being spoilt,
Wow,
not being hard done by for entertainment.
Absolutely incredible stuff. And the other one is Dortmund, which I think is, they were going to work their way into this list somewhere, Dortmund, for me, and wingers is where I ended up putting them. Similar to Rennes, where they're not, I don't think they take massive gambles, Dortmund. I think they occupy this very obvious position in the market, which is we're not an elite club. We're everything but. We will take a player who is 17 or 18. We will give you game time. You will play in front of this magnificent stadium, these great fans. You will play Champions League football, and in a couple of years, we'll probably sell you for
that was going to be my point.
10 times.
We will sell you.
Yeah, it's a pathway. Yeah. It's a pathway. But they and a lot of these clubs that we've talked about have been able to carve out this place in the ecosystem, and that's why it works. Because wingers will join Rennes because they know that they can get a big move off the back. Same applies to Dortmund. Dembele did it. Jadon Sancho did it. Christian Pulisic has done it. Jamie Gittins has done it. Karim Adeyemi is in the process of doing that. And for Dortmund in particular, but this applies to all of them, if you've got a successful case or two to point to, it only makes the job easier moving forward.
100%.
Like how easy would it have been for them to approach Jamie Gittins and say, do you want to be the next Sancho? Yes.
Perfect.
Done. That's it. It's a 5-second call because they have evidence that they have provided this pathway to these players. And so that's a big part of it. That's a really big part of it. It's a bit sad because it means that clubs like this never get to hold on to those players for too long. Or if they do, it's an anomaly. It's Marco Reus or Julian Brandt who never quite get anywhere.
They got a long way.
Not to say they haven't been a success at Dortmund, but they just never quite moved on. But for the most part, yeah, people move on.
Yeah, for sure. And they still got a decent few seasons out of, your Aubameyangs, your Sanchos, your Pulisic's, etc. But I do definitely get your point. I think Ligue 1, thinking back to Rennes and your point there, Ligue 1 is, in general, I think a very good place for wingers. I think it just feels like maybe it fits with the French football culture, just sort of freedom of expression. I thought Lille were potentially another good example of that. I mean, any club that have had Luis Campos as their sporting director, I think generally sign pretty good forwards. And Lille, when they had Rafa Leao, they had Nicola Pepe, who was, people forget, before he moved to Arsenal, was an absolute sensation for a season. Yes, they overpaid for him, didn't quite work out, but he's doing pretty well at Villarreal now. Anwar El-Ghazi was signed for a very cheap fee, eventually carved out for a pretty decent career. Someone like Zegrova, now at Juventus, he's had injury issues. Javinho, again, eventually ended up at Arsenal. That's a pretty solid historical record of wingers at Lille. Now, let's move into the area that I think is going to potentially attract the most interest and maybe controversy, because everyone wants to be known as the club that signs good strikers. And when I read your brilliant article, Sam, you picked out a club in the Premier League that a lot of people probably wouldn't be their first thought.
Really?
Brentford.
But look at... Okay, yeah, fine. No, fine.
On the scale of clubs we've talked about.
I think you're right. Because it wasn't until someone pointed it out like a month ago that it even registered with me. But this decade-long run...
It's crazy.
...that Brentford are on with strikers is absolutely outrageous. So to qualify this from their perspective, it's surely strikers it's the hardest one to recruit for. Like, the pitfalls that exist within buying strikers are ridiculous. And when you get a good one, like goalkeepers, you don't really want to lose them, except it is a more fluid market because everybody needs a good striker. But the amount that go wrong, it's terrible. And the amount of wasted money in this area is shocking. So for Brentford to go Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, Brian Mbeumo, Yohan Wissa into Igor Thiago, without really missing a beat, is pretty incredible. Unfortunately, it's my great regret of this article that I didn't quite get to speak to anybody at Brentford to dig into what this process is. It's very much behind lock and key. I guess that's for good reason, because they don't miss. They really don't miss.
They really don't. It's super impressive. I mean, there's a couple of clubs that are higher up the food chain than that have a very great reputation or a well-established reputation for signing strikers. In response to my tweet, so many people responded, Liverpool and strikers, except for Darwin Nunez, who I think people exaggerated his issues. Liverpool have got a pretty decent record at strikers, going to further back to the 90s, and then Torres and Suarez, but there's some duds in there like Andy Carroll as well, but Firmino and Mane, whether you count Mane as a striker is another debate as well. But Atletico Madrid and strikers, take out João Felix, and that's a very successful run going back to Diego Forlan and Aguero, and now you're looking at, and then people like Falcao, and then Griezmann and Morata and Suarez coming for that year or two as well.
And so somewhere in the middle there was Diego Costa.
And
at the very start of all of that was Fernando Torres at the academy.
There we have it. Yeah. And I think Napoli have a great record of signing forwards as well. From interesting places as well. You know, they weren't just picking offshoots from bigger clubs, if that makes sense, like Cavani, Higuain. Well, Higuain's a terrible example of that, actually, because he did come from Real Madrid. But Mertens, and they have also spent big on occasion. They've taken that gamble. Someone like Victor Osimhen, huge fee they paid for Lille, like massive. One of the biggest in Serie A history. That transfer came off spectacularly as well. You even look at the work of taking Højlund on loan. That's worked out. Lukaku had a very good year as well before getting injured. Going back to Lavezzi as well. So yeah, Napoli and forwards have done well.
So this run for Napoli, I didn't manage to get Napoli into the article, but it is, I think, for me, is one of the most impressive runs. It starts with Lavezzi in 2007.
Yeah.
That is the year they are promoted back into Serie A after toiling around in the second division. So they start off with Lavezzi. He cost 6 million euros from San Lorenzo, Jack's new favourite team. And a couple of years later, Edinson Cavani joins him.
Not bad.
Absolutely fantastic from Palermo. To replace Cavani, that they go to Gonzalo Higuain, who is I wouldn't say unimportant at Real Madrid, but he was not a first 11 player, and he often played on the right. Do you remember when he just used to pop up on the right for Jose Mourinho?
He was just not key.
He just wasn't a key player. Anyway, they made him a key player. He set a goal scoring record in Serie A. That's key. Then he left, and Dries Mertens just was like, "I'll be a striker," and scored like 1 million goals. Osimhen into Lukaku into Højlund. It's
faultless,
it's
almost.
ridiculously good. But Liverpool and Napoli and Atletico Madrid really are at the top of the food chain. So a bit like Chelsea in that respect, where they do get the pick of the players and they do get to take the very best. what's more impressive to me is a club like Eintracht Frankfurt, who have excelled at taking obviously really good strikers who were just somehow in the worst possible place in their career, like really down on their luck players. So there's a run of 5 here. Not all of these apply, but 3 of them do. Sebastian Aller, paired with Luka Jovic, lethal. Randall Colomwani, Omar Marmoush into Hugo Ekitike. Pretty damn good. Now, Jovic went to Benfica and he just bombed out, didn't he? Like, he just didn't, for whatever reason.
He went to Real Madrid.
Jovic did not, he went to Real Madrid off the back of Eintracht.
Yes, yeah.
But before he joined Eintracht, he was at Benfica.
Sorry, I see what you mean.
As a wonder kid, having moved over from Serbia, everyone expected great things from him, and it didn't really work. Eintracht took him for basically nothing and made him into a 60 million player. Omar Marmoush was released from Wolfsburg, didn't make the grade. Bang.
Crazy.
Eintracht, a couple of years, brilliant player, moves to City. And Ekitike failed at PSG. Probably not his fault.
Yeah, they oversigned in that position, but yeah.
They did. They didn't use him very well either, I would say. Like, I don't lay any of the blame at Ekitike.
Sure.
But Eintracht is someone smart enough to be like, oh, hang on a minute, that's a massive opportunity. If we sign him for 30 million euros, we're going to triple our investment. And they do so. So that's good work. Then there's a couple of teams who use front twos, which I think is really important here because it does help platform strikers a bit better. And Villarreal, Nicholas Jackson, Alexander Sørloth, Tierno Barry, and Tani Oluwaseyi now as well. Of course, Gerard Moreno was there the whole time, Jack. I can see you staring at me from the corner of my eye. They scout far and wide. Yeah, they'll go to MLS, they'll go to Switzerland, they'll go anywhere. You know, Nicholas Jackson was plucked from a Senegalese academy situation. And Sturm Graz did the same thing. Sturm Graz are clearly looking at players that can clock 35 kilometres or more because Højlund, Yeboah, Omega, they all do it. So Omega's going to join Chelsea in the summer. He's come through that Sturm Graz situation into Strasbourg. Højlund now at Napoli. They're looking at physical metrics. There are ways to gain this system, but it's still, I think, fraught with risk. So for everyone that we've spoken about here, incredible work to get it so right so often.
I love those shouts. Giving credit to the underdog, as it were, which, you know, keeps their ecosystem healthy for years to come. These sales are so important to clubs of that stature. To kind of wrap up the episode, why don't we each suggest a kind of position that our own club signs in very well? And because I've thrown this on you, and we haven't even gone to Jack so far in this episode, I'm going to start with Sunderland. And actually, bar our Championship League 1 years, which admittedly was 4 years, it was longer than that, it was 5 years. We had a very good run of goalkeepers at Sunderland, and we've kind of brought that back this year, which I've really enjoyed. So we went Thomas Sorensen, then we went Craig Gordon sort of time, then Jordan Pickford came through our academy, and then we quickly relegated. But in the last couple of years, well, particularly this year, Robin Roos, phenomenal addition at goalkeeper. So I think there is a little element of luck there because that is 20 years crossed. But it's a kind of freakish thing that I've really enjoyed. What about you as a Villa fan, Sam? Where do you think you signed very well?
So in my lifetime, Villa, I think, have been synonymous with some very, very good centre-backs.
I was hoping you were going to say that because the replies to my tweet, they were all talking about Villa centre-backs.
Yeah, so obviously it starts with God himself, Paul McGrath. But then as I'm a sort of 10-year-old, 11-year-old, whatever it might be, moving into Olof Mellberg, moving into Martin Lawson. We had Gary Cahill, and Martin O'Neill decided that he was surplus to requirements and sold him off to Bolton. He then went to Chelsea and won a Champions League. That was pretty tough. But he preferred Zat Knight to
back the wrong horse
to Gary Cahill, and I think he preferred Curtis Davies too, who was solid, but not Gary Cahill. So let's remove Curtis and Zat from that conversation.
Shazza Zat Knight.
Then. Some really good ones there. Martin Lawson was one of the best I've seen. He just had bad knees, just really bad knees. So that fits because Paul McGrath had really bad knees as well. And then Villa have got a really good collection of centre-backs now. Konsa is phenomenal. Torres is obviously brilliant. Mings has been very strong for 6 years or so. And in between that, even in the barren years where Villa were really obviously terrible, Ron Vlaar was there. The man who single-handedly marked Lionel Messi out of a World Cup game.
There we have it. I also had someone in response to me said Villa and centre-backs, and they sent photos of lots of those players. They also shoved in John Terry, which I thought was so cheeky.
Oh, yeah. Well, technically he did play for Villa, yeah.
You can't put John Terry in there at whatever he was, 34, when he was, one of the most decorated centre-backs of all time. That's not great outing, but I take your point. Jack, what about Fulham? Where do you think you're particularly strong?
I would have also gone goalkeeper. Fulham have had a very good run of goalkeepers, in particular in the Premier League era. There have been some duds in the mix, but on the whole, you go from Mike Taylor, who came up with Fulham in 2001, Edwin van der Sar, Casey Keller was there, and then Mark Schwarzer, obviously, kind of discarded at that point in his career, reinvigorated himself, ended up winning a Champions League with Chelsea as a common theme here. But then to bring in
Robin Roofs, you stay where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And then to bring in Bernd Leno when they did on a deal for like £1.6 million and has been phenomenal. I think he is coming to the end of his period of his powers. And when I went on a Sunderland podcast this week, they were like, if you could sign one player from Sunderland, who would it be? And I was like, Robin Roofs. But I think we've been quite good there. And I think we've been relatively good at fullback in the last 10 years or so. Down that right-hand side, Ryan Fredericks was an excellent servant for the club, and then effectively replacing him with Kenny Tete, who has been phenomenal and by my money remains one of the best one-on-one defenders in the Premier League. And that goes back as well to Steve Finnan and the likes of him. From on the other side, we've seen Anthony Robinson and what he has become, but there were plenty of good players. And I think maybe this is not world beaters, but serviceable players in the period we were in. Joe Bryan in the Championship was excellent. There have been a lot of good fullbacks that have come through at Fulham, or at least kind of been plucked from obscurity.
John Onorisa?
Yeah, I mean, less so that one. John Onorisa used to really frustrate me.
Did he? I always quite liked him.
I really liked him at Liverpool, and then he signed for Fulham, and he thought the bit that annoyed me, he was fine, perfectly capable player. He didn't really do any of the rockets for us, which is annoying. He thought he had a long throw, and he didn't. He used to like proper wind up, do the ball, and it wouldn't make the edge of the 18-yard box. We're like, what are you doing? Just get the ball back in play, you lunatic.
So he'd fit in really nicely.
Yeah, he's a 25, 26 player.
Yeah, exactly. He was just ahead of his time. Look, I've got to say one thing. I didn't think I'd be saying this on the podcast, but Sam, I think you've undersold Brentford on the strikers front there. I genuinely think you've undersold them, because even before this period with Watkins, you think about it, the player that preceded Ollie Watkins was Neil Maupay, who was plucked from relative obscurity in France and absolutely tore it up in the Championship. He replaced Lassie Weber, who's less of a thing, but they signed him for about 1.1 million. He scored 29 Championship goals in 2 seasons, which is perfectly capable. He replaced Andre Gray, who they signed for 600 grand and sold for £6 million to Burnley. They've been doing this ever since Clayton Donaldson was replaced in League One. Like, they have absolutely nailed their striker recruitment.
Shout out everyone post.
To be fair, Clayton Donaldson was a great servant for Brentford, but he just wasn't very good. But everyone they've signed since, pretty much every single one of them has been bang on, and that is an incredible streak. Because even the players that weren't brilliant, like Lassie Weber was fine, but not like unbelievable. They sold him for a profit. They made profit on everyone that they sold in this period. It's absolutely nuts. And, chapeau, I suppose, to Brentford's recruitment.
Flowers given by a Fulham fan.
Weirdly, I had forgotten about Neil Maupay.
Yeah.
It's easily done.
But definitely. He's got an amazing CV now. But he's just sort of shithousing his way
Where
around
is he now?
Europe.
Is he Sevilla?
He's at Sevilla.
Yeah, cool.
They did a vlog. I actually saw it on YouTube today, a vlog of his signing. And he took him around. I think he's trying to get into social media. He's that kind of personality.
He was always quite quirky on social media, to be fair, wasn't he? He was.
He's very much like the James Madison school of wind-up merchant.
Yes, okay. Well, look at me doing Brentford a disservice and a Fulham fan correcting me. Good Lord.
Well, I think that's time to wrap up the episode. We've shouted out Rennes. Who else did we give a shout out to? Wolfsburg. Sam had some much more interesting suggestions than I did.
Dortmund, Villarreal, Sturm,
exactly.
Graz, Brighton, Bayer Leverkusen. We covered a lot of ground, but there's a lot of clubs there that deserve an enormous amount of respect for their recruitment over the last few years. A massive thanks to Sam for doing the bulk of the work in preparation for this episode. If you want to read more of his work, go check out ESPN, and he's also just started a newsletter. I have, yeah. Look at me. Yeah, I'm getting really annoyed these days at how difficult it is to distribute your content to the people that may wish to read it. So difficult these days. Since the death of Twitter, more or less, it's just regardless of the fact that half the population of Twitter is just left, the lot that have remained, links get buried, and it's very hard to see people's work. So it's quite frustrating. So if you are interested in what I get up to on a weekly basis, which includes this podcast, of course, but any written features I do for ESPN and any other stuff, any podcast for Sky or whatever it might be, I'm going to stick it in a Friday newsletter. Here's what I did. It will not be more than 500 words. I will not spend more than 30 minutes on it, but I would just like to show people what I do a little bit easier.
I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah, so there you go.
Go check it out for sure. Jack, thank you so much as well. Good luck on Sunday.
Thank you very much. Good luck to you as well. May the best team win. I'd be very, very surprised if it's us, but that might just be the pessimist in me.
Oh, we shall see. We shall see. Guys, thank you so much for listening to The Truth, episode 19. We will catch you next week.